Welcome back. I'm Travis with Linux Academy. So I wanted to start this section off by talking about the Docker command line. If you're new to Docker, the command that we're going to be using is the Docker command. And I always like using the help function. That way we have the ability to go and take a look and see what all the commands that we have available to us. So I'm going to go and pipe this to more real quick. Now the first thing that pops up is the options followed by the management commands. If you work with Docker before, all the commands that we've worked with have been rolled up into a management command. For example, Docker PS is now Docker Container LS. As we work our way through this course, we'll probably touch on the majority of these commands, with the exception of a few. Now here we have the Docker commands. And as I mentioned previously, all these commands have been rolled up under a management command. For example, we have attach, cp, and create. Those have been rolled up under container. The same thing with images. Images typically goes and lists what images you have on your Docker server, and that is now under Docker image, and specifically it's the ls subcommand. As we go through this course, we're mainly going to be working with the management commands. The first management command we're going to be working with is Docker image. So if I do Docker image -h, we'll get a list of all the commands that are associated with Docker image. So let's go and take a look at the Docker image ls command. There's really not a whole lot to it. All we have to do is just go and execute that command. Now we do have a couple flags we can use. Probably the most important one is the -a flag or --all. And this is going to go and show all of our images, and this is going to include any kind of images that were hidden. Now let's go and execute a Docker image ls. And as you can see, currently we don't have any images. So let's go and correct that. What we're going to do is do a Docker image pull. And then we need to go and specify an image that we want to pull, and I'm going to use Nginx. What we're doing is we're going and communicating with Docker Hub to go and pull the Nginx image. Now if I go and execute a Docker image ls, you can see that we do have an image now. Now let's go and get some more details on this image. We're going to go and execute a Docker image inspect, and we need to supply the image ID. So I'm going to go and copy and paste this in and go and run it. And what we're getting back is a giant JSON document with the details of this image. So here we have the ID. It's a SHA-256. We have the repo tag, which is going to be Nginx and latest. We also have the ability to go and take a look at any kind of environment variables that were defined in here, which is right here. And the command that will be executed when the container starts up. The command here that is being executed is Nginx, and they're specifying that the daemon is going to be off. And the reason why the daemon is off is that in Docker, we want to make sure that when we execute a command, that we're not running it as a service. And typically, Nginx runs as a service. And there's also some additional info, such as the maintainer. As you can see, this is being managed by Nginx. And we also have an email address we can go if we have any questions. To get a listing of all the container subcommands, execute docker container -h. As we make our way through this course, I'm going to try and touch on as many of these commands as possible, but I'm not going to be able to cover all of them. The ones I do recommend that you go and explore on your own. With that out of the way, let's go and execute a Docker container ls. Currently, we don't have any containers running, so let's go and change that. I'm going to go and execute Docker container, run, and then we need to go and supply an image. I'm just going to use BusyBox. BusyBox is a pretty simple image. It just goes and runs sh. So if we just go and execute a Docker container and ls, you'll see that nothing is currently running. And the reason why is because all BusyBox does is that it just runs sh. So it runs its command and then it stops. And when we do a Docker container ls with the -a flag, we're going to get a listing of all containers, including the ones that have been stopped. So I'm going to go and start up another container. Now I'm using the -P flag, and this is going to go and take all of our ports that exist for this container and map it to a random port number. Now there's one more flag I need to use, and that's the -D flag, because if I don't, the container is going to run in the foreground and we're not going to be able to go and execute any other commands. And the image I'm going to supply is Nginx. Okay, so now we can do things like top as well as stop and start a container, which I couldn't do with the BusyBox one because it was already stopped. Now let's do a Docker container PS to get a listing of all the running containers. As you can see, the Nginx container is running, and it has a random port of 32769. Now I can go and execute a Docker container inspect and grab the container ID. I can either use the container ID or the name. I find it easier just to use the ID. And there we go. We have a listing of all the information about our container. Now, here towards the bottom, we have the gateway that it is using, as well as the private IP that has been assigned to it. What I can do is I can execute a curl and then HTTP : and just grab this IP here. And what we're getting back here is the default welcome page from Nginx. Let's go and run that command again. There's a lot of information that we have about our container that we can go and look up. Some of the stuff is what we've already found in the image, which is the run command. There we go. Now we're at the top. We get a listing of the arguments, which is the -g and the daemon auth. We saw that from our Docker image. We have the status, which is running. We have running true, paused false. Restarting is also false because it's running. Whether it's dead, and we also have the PID. Also, any kind of networking or volume information will be showing up within our Docker inspect. By default, if we don't go and supply a network, we're going to be using the default bridge network, which is supplied to us by Docker. And we also have our listing of port mappings, which we have port 80 using TCP. The host IP is 0.0.0.0, and the host port is 32769. And that's pretty much it. Now let's go and execute a Docker container top. As you can see, we have two processes coming back. We have the Nginx master process along with a worker process. Let's go and list our containers. So execute a Docker container ls. And let's go and attach ourselves to our Nginx container. When we use attach, it's attaching to the standard in and out of the container. And right now, standard out is being sent to the access logs, which means we don't have access to shell. At least not in this way. There's another way we can go and get around that. Now, another thing you need to be aware of, when we detach from the container, it's going to stop it. So when we go and list our containers, we can see that Nginx is no longer running. Now let's get a listing of all of our stop containers, and we'll go and start Nginx. To go and start a container, execute Docker container start, and then supply the ID or the name of the container. And there we go, our container is now back up and running. Likewise, I can do the opposite, and I can go and stop my container. And then I can go and start back up again. I can also get the log data coming back from our container to see what's going on. Currently, there's nothing coming back because there's been no activity. Now I can go and generate some traffic by executing curl. But first, I need to get the port number that was randomly assigned to it. So we're going to go and list our containers. So we're going to go and execute curl on localhost, and then the port, which is 32774. Okay, so now that we've gone and generated some traffic, let's go and recheck that log. Execute Docker container logs and supply the name or ID of the container. We only have one entry, and that's because we only executed curl once. Once again, go and list your containers by executing Docker container ls. Now we're going to be using the stats command to go and get a live stream of the resource usage for our container. Execute Docker container stats and then supply the name or ID of the container. As you can see, our resource usage is pretty low. Memory is less than 1%. And we're not really using much CPU either. Now to go and break out of this, you have to use Control-C, and that'll get you back to the terminal prompt. Now previously, we tried to go and attach to our container to get to the command line of our Nginx container. And that didn't work out because the contents of the log file for Nginx was being streamed to standard out. Now we can get around this by running the exec command. This command allows us to go and execute commands on a container. For example, let's say I want to get a directory listing. The command I would supply would be ls and then the path to whatever directory I want listed. So we'll be executing Docker container exec. We're going to be using two flags, which is I and T. I stands for interactive, and T stands for TTY. We either need to supply the name or ID of the container and then bin bash. Now we've been dropped into the prompt of the container, so I can go and execute ls. I can do an ls in another directory just to prove that we are actually on our Nginx container by going to user share Nginx and then HTML. As you can see, there's the contents of our HTML directory. If I go and execute exit, it doesn't go and stop our container. As you can see, our container is still running. Now this time I'm going to execute a Docker container exec, but I'm going to go and list the contents of the HTML directory. So execute Docker container exec -it, the ID of the container, and then the command ls/user/share/nginx/html. And we're getting back the contents of that directory. So this is very similar to what we just did, except we're not actually logging into the container to go and execute the command. By using exec, we can execute any command that is present on the container. Now we're going to go and pause our container. Go and execute docker container ls to get the ID. The command we'll be executing is docker container pause, and then supply the name or ID of the container. Now if we do an ls, we can see that our container is paused. And then we can go and unpause it. What pause does is it's going to go and pause all the processes running on that container. And when we go and unpause the container, it's going to allow those processes to go and resume. Okay, so let's go and talk about cleanup. Now we do have a couple ways of going and deleting containers from Docker. The first one is using Docker RM. And we can use this on either a stopped or a running container. Now, if I'm going to use this on a running container, I need to use the -f flag to go and force it to stop, and then it will go and remove it. So let's go and try this out on our Nginx container. Execute Docker container RM, use the F flag. I'm going to go and grab the ID of the Nginx container. And if I do an ls/la, you can see that our Nginx container is now deleted. Now, the second way of going and deleting containers is running a Docker container prune. And this is going to go and remove all of the stop containers. And we do need to go and confirm this. And our BusyBox container should be deleted. And as you can see, it's gone. Now, I do want to go and cover some additional flags here. We can use the -f flag to go and force the deletion of containers. That way, we bypass the prompt. Now, as we move through this course, we'll be introduced to more commands, but these are the more common ones you'll be using, specifically dealing with images and containers. Go ahead and mark this lesson complete.